welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or UPTV, as we say on the televised version of this show. These views are our own, and by our in this instance, I mean myself and my charming guest who will introduce himself now.
Hello, I'm Felipe Menanto.
How are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me here.
Trying to figure out a way here where I can sit and see you at the same time. Running into things. You said you had trouble finding this place. Was it the building?
Well,
or
no, it's the
studio?
door. It's like the doors. There are like so many doors, and I usually come here to, I'm friends with Ruth, Ruth Wyman. She's my lawyer, and I come to the post office, and I come to the bike shop, and they all have different entrances. So I didn't know which one it was.
Okay.
So that's usually that's really what happened.
Yeah, a lot of times people come here and wave and then keep walking that way, and then I have to go run down the hall and chase them to get them to come into the studio here.
That's really what happened to me today.
We try to keep it kind of, low key. We don't want to be too obvious about ourselves. That's why the curtains are there. We kind of hide sometimes. But actually, sometimes it's very strange when the curtains are open. People come and stand there and try and talk to you through the window, and you can't hear them, so it's just like
double window.
They're mouthing things and things like that. So, welcome to the show. This show is CU Immigration. It's mostly about immigration, but it's kind of about immigrants. It's about, if I were to describe it, I would say it's about humanizing the topic of immigration, because too often it is on the news media, it's just this thing. It's almost like a disease that people are talking about, immigrants, immigration, the pros and cons. What are immigrants doing that are good, and what are the bad, like it's just this one monolithic group. But immigrants are all sorts of people, of various sorts and different kinds. So you have some experience with this?
That is true. It's so interesting that you talk about the word immigrant, because it's recently, we could talk about, my path of immigration. And it's so interesting how for many years I was not really an immigrant. You kind of become an immigrant once you decide you're going to stay. And it's very interesting how in English there's a different usage of the people who live in another country and are not from that country. And that is the word expat.
Oh, yeah.
And I've seen how usually if you are what is called from the Western and you live in another country, you're an expat, you're not an immigrant. So, and sometimes you can live, for instance, forever in Brazil.
Yeah.
And you're from the UK, and you're going to call yourself an expat. But in reality, you're an immigrant. It's just you decided not to use that level with yourself. So I think and then comes the legal term of when do you become an immigrant and when you're simply a visiting scholar or depending on the legality of the very complex
visiting scholar, right?
U.S. U.S. system. So it's interesting. So I only legally became an immigrant once I decided to apply for the green card. I got lucky enough, so I'm an academic. My work is an astrophysicist. I work at the University of Illinois. I'm a scientist at NCSA, which is the National Center for Supercomputing Application, and I'm also a research faculty in the astronomy department. And I work in problems of cosmology that tends to do with the, how the universe started, what is the growth of the structure, how is it going to end, how do we figure out how the matter is distributed, and so on. So that's what I get paid to do. And then in my free time, of course, I delve in politics, and I'm very proud to be a father of two boys. So I was not an immigrant. So I before coming to the U.S., so I've been in the U.S. for close to 19 years. I came here in the year 2000. It's a very easy, I came here in the year 2000, so it's 2019. It's 19 years.
Yeah, that's
extremely easy math.
Yeah, that is. Thank you. I require easy math.
So, but before coming here, I lived in the UK for 4 years. And actually, I never considered myself an immigrant there because I never saw myself living permanently in that country, even though I have a fantastic experience as a grad student. And then if you move to the U.S. and if you are a visitor, you have very different kinds of status with different visas and different programs, and you are always non-immigrant. If you ever say that you're an immigrant, you actually you get in trouble. You could be deported because the reason why you're here is temporary.
Yeah. Right.
And you do this immediate change. It's like it's a completely goes from on and off when you decide to apply for permanent residency.
Right.
And then you go from non-immigrant status to migrant status, and then you become an immigrant from day and night. But somehow you do that change in your mind, and it's all this. How do you think about yourself, about your identity? Where do you belong? What are your roots? Who are you? And slowly you start loving the same way your new country as the country where you grew up, and that's something very interesting that happens to many of the immigrants. Now, something that I have a story that is a bit embarrassing, and it has to do with with immigration. So I was lucky enough to use the canonical system in the U.S. for immigration, which is extremely complicated, and doing immigration legally in the U.S. is like a catch-22. It's hardly complicated, even if you have something that people think that is something that you have to provide to the country. Anyway, so I live in different places, and before coming here, we were living in New Jersey. We were young and foolish enough to buy a house that needed a lot of remodeling, so we spent a lot of time and money, and we sink a lot of money on that, and that's part of the experiences in the U.S. And I had a very good friend who was a plumber, and he was Cuban, and and of course he came with the Cuban way, which is fairly it's like the dry food, wet food. So he was able to come here through the through the normal system. But then he introduced me to some of his colleagues that were working in construction. And there was this gentleman working on HVAC, who was extremely brilliant. And but he was kind of disorganized, and he sometimes worked until very late. And we were young, we didn't have kids, so we will be working. I will be doing something on the house, and he will be working, putting duct work until like 11 p.m. I didn't mind because I could sleep the next day.
Yeah.
Anyway, so and he will stay with us, and we will have dinner. And I remember once he asked me, "Hey, what's your story of immigration? How do you get into the U.S.?" Because he was actually collecting stories about people, and I was like fresh out of the boat, so I did not understand the different struggles of people migrating to the U.S. I was, an ignorant mostly, and he told me, "How do you come to the U.S.?" And I also have to say that I was very embarrassed that I took a flight from Heathrow and landed on LAX, because he has really impressive stories that he was telling about how he got into the U.S. and his friends got into the U.S. and he was actually collecting stories. So that was kind of like my introduction, and I started like suddenly awakening and understanding that because I speak Spanish, I was able to talk to them. They were able to tell me in confidence something that otherwise they wouldn't. And I felt very fortunate and embarrassed to not have the same story of struggle that he had. I also met with kids who were drywallers, and they were coming from, I think, El Salvador, and they told me about pupusas. I didn't know what a pupusa was. And these kids some of them were like 16, 17s. And they were working really hard, and they have escaped violence in their home countries. And I slowly started to get my education by, I guess by the fortune of speaking the same language of all of these other immigrants that were not as fortunate as me.
That's interesting, how just because you were able to communicate in that way, it gave you this opportunity to be connected to people that
and educated.
Maybe you wouldn't otherwise be that connected to, or you wouldn't run into them in the day-to-day. When you're doing astrophysics, you're not going to run into too many drywallers.
No, and there's something beautiful about the common language of all of the countries in across Latin America is that even though you might come from very different upbringings and traditions, there's this bond that gives you language and a sense of trust and immediate trust. It's like there's some kind of brotherhood, sisterhood. It's like a secret handshake that I was, I don't think I deserve, but I've been given, and I try to treat it with respect.
Yeah. That brings up, which we probably shouldn't go into, the whole Latino concept. I know a lot of people really dislike that term because it's like, I'm not Latin. There's no, but it's the language that's the connection. That's where the term Latino comes from, or Latina.
That's an, I mean, very, so that's something that I've struggled for years. And I actually, I think that slowly I'm coming to terms and trying to understand, my identity as Latino. And I'm trying to give that to my kids who are Latinos in the U.S.
Yeah.
Because they're like your self-identity, and then it's what the country thinks that you are. So, I come from a country that very few people know what it is. I come from Chile, which is
Chile.
It's a one-dimensional country at the end of the world, and you only
mountain range.
Yeah, so it's like kind of like the last station on a railroad track. So you only get to Chile if you wanted to go to Chile. It's really not on the way to any other place.
Well, it used to be before the Panama Canal.
That's true. That's true. It was actually Valparaiso. It was a very important port. I'm trying to, you see, as you leave your home country and you start to make roots in a different country, and you start calling that country your own at the same time, you realize that you need to also figure out how you deal with your identity and what makes you who you are. So I remember when we were living in New Jersey, and there was this very nice Latin American or Latino supermarket called El Progreso. I think it was called El Progreso.
No, we got
There's
one
so
here.
many El Progresos, and you go to through the aisles, and they have like every flag of Latin America, except of course from Chile.
Of course.
Because we are not a big country, so we're usually done. There are not that many of us.
Yeah.
So when you think about Latino in the U.S., of course you don't think about somebody like me, or you don't think about Chilean culture, and it doesn't matter. That's actually what I turned. Years ago, I realized that who cares? I think that Latino and the concept of Latino should not be created to accommodate me. It shouldn't be made to understand people like me, who in general come mostly from privilege in Latin American countries. So
why not?
Because I think that I shouldn't say that it shouldn't. It should never do it, but it shouldn't be the first mission. Right? I think that the first mission should be try to create an identity for people who came to the U.S. for reasons different than mine. But what I am trying to do, and what I try to do particularly with my two boys, is to feel them proud to be Latinos. But how are they Latinos? Well, in any way you want, your own way. And I tell them that, for instance, I come from Chile, and most of my friends make fun of me because we don't eat spicy food in Chile, in general, even though we're called Chile. We come from a very cold climate. The water in the ocean is extremely cold. It's colder than anywhere. So most Americans, most Latin Americans cannot understand how does that be? It's like, how could you be a real Latin American country if you don't have spicy food? And I say, well, it's our way. But then there are other things that unite us, like the sense of come to my house, stay for dinner, stay as long as you want. You can kind of like shop and announce. So there's this... and this is what I try to tell my kids about, have this, Latin American way, this Chilean way of being Latino in the U.S. How? By being, making everybody feel at home in your home all of the time. Make them feel that they're always welcome, and they're gonna be treated like a good friend. And I think that's something that unites very across. It's a broadly speaking, is something very common.
Yeah.
That's about the Latino identity, which is complicated. I think that I'm slowly feel comfortable calling myself a Latino. I'm worried sometimes that I might not. I should, because in countries like Latin America, they always have also very segregated societies.
Yes.
And I was lucky enough to come from a part of the society in my country who was, it was mostly privileged. My parents were not rich, but we were certainly not poor. And it had taken me decades to understand that.
Yeah, I have a friend who's Mapuche, and I've heard lots of stories about that, her growing up and that sort of thing. So I'm conscious of the differences, and then in some countries like Brazil, the color segregation is really intense, and even in Mexico to a certain extent,
Oh yeah.
still.
There's the word güero,
Yeah.
which actually, to some extent means blonde, but it actually means whiter than me. That's really what güero means. So you can be actually fairly dark skinned, and somebody can call you güero because they are. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't be speaking for, for Mexicans, but that's what some of my Mexican friends have told me.
So it is interesting though how the Spanish influence has left a certain mark across Central and South America, and then the indigenous influence, how they combined and work together, because a lot of what you're talking about, that welcoming people in and that sort of thing, that's a very strong indigenous cultural trait that you find all through the Americas, North and South, of sharing what you have and greeting people and always trying to feed everybody all the time when they come over. It's like, here's food, and you're supposed to eat. It's impolite not to eat something that somebody's offering you, even if you just ate. You're still supposed to taste something. But yeah, I mean that's very complicated. But in terms of identity, I mean that all factors into how one sees oneself and how one sees one's fellows. Obviously, like you were talking about other immigrant people that you got to know. I mean, there's a certain camaraderie there of language, if nothing else. But as far as the experience of being an immigrant, did your sense of self change somehow when you crossed that line? I mean, you were like, okay, first you're Chilean, right? You grow up, that's who I am. I'm me. Obviously, you have your name, your family, your gender, whatever you're defining yourself as. But then you moved to UK. Was that your first overseas thing? Did you retained your original sense of identity, and you're just visiting the UK? Was that kind of how that felt?
Yes. Well, it felt. Well, I was very young. I was only 22, and there are people that immigrate when they're even younger, and I was. So I was, of course, very busy with grad school, but at the same time, you're always wondering what next, where are we gonna live, what are we gonna do next, and I personally felt that Europe was not the place that I wanted to spend the rest of my life.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I was ready to go back to Chile at the end, or some other country. I was ready to try some other place. I was, and this is extremely personal, I was missing the open space of the Americas.
Yeah.
Europe is beautiful. It's interesting, but it's old and tamed. And everything is beautiful, but it's a garden, and the path have been walked so many times for thousands of years. You can never get away from everything. But in the country where I grew up, even though I grew up in a gigantic city, you go probably 50 miles away from the city, and you are in open space. You go to the mountains, or you go to southern Chile, which is kind of like where I spend my summer vacation. So my summer vacations, I spend them in southern Chile, which is one of the most beautiful places in terms of being untamed. It's very similar to Alaska and the Pacific Northwest, and on the Atacama Desert, which is empty. Yeah. So I had this. I was really missing that. It was. I was not homesick from Chile. I was actually homesick from the openness of empty spaces. But that's very personal. That's what I feel very comfortable in Urbana Champaign, because as soon as you get out of Urbana, you are in the middle of nowhere, and you have the horizon, and you have these open skies. It's not for everyone. I'm not saying that my approach is the correct one. It's simply how I felt. So when living in the UK, no, I did not. I still felt very connected to Chile.
Yeah.
And then we moved to the U.S. And we lived in California, which was a dramatic change from coming from the country of the clouds to the total sunshine of Southern California.
Yeah.
And then slowly you start, I still felt I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what I was going to do with my career. I didn't know if I wanted to stay in the U.S. or go back. And then eventually you start getting more comfortable. And I think that the biggest change came once we became permanent residents. We were permanent residents for a while, and then we have our oldest son. He was born in the U.S. in New Jersey, and my son was both American and Chilean. And I lived through 2 administrations of George Bush, and I felt very frustrated that I couldn't vote, that I couldn't do anything, that I couldn't vote in Chile either. And
Really?
I wanted to be part of the system. So as soon as we were permanent residents for 5 years, I said, let's naturalize. I want to vote. I want to be part of the system. I want to be able to have an opinion and be able to sustain my opinion saying, I vote. I was part of the system, not just a foreigner.
Yeah, right.
Having an opinion. And that's actually when I said, okay, I want to be an immigrant. And it really changed your point of view as how invested you are in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You are in this. You decided to pledge allegiance to another country. You decided that you are, as an adult, you can go and fight in a war. That's one of the things that you do when you...
Well, yeah.
You need to say that. It's not optional.
Yeah, you have to be willing to do it.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's actually, you could see the change. You could see the change how you start, adopting it. And I have to say that the U.S. is probably the easiest countries to be adopted, to be assimilated. The U.S. is very open compared to other countries, compared to my own home country.
Open as in like welcoming or
accepting.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not saying that it doesn't come with the struggles, but compared to...
I'm looking at her because she's from Japan, and she was just in England and came back over here after being in England for a while. So I'm like, searching for an opinion. I mean, I keep feeling these opinions kind of floating from over there when you say these things, like the wide open spaces. I think her first impression of getting off the plane here at the U.S. was like, oh my God, there's nothing here. It's just like empty. It's like completely empty. I can't survive. It's confusing. And, Japan's another country that's like, people have been living there for a long, long time. And so it's not, you don't get this sense of like emptiness, sort of like nobody's using that. It's just big open space that's like, it's just sitting there because nobody's thought of a way to use it.
Yeah. I would say that, Tokyo is kind of like the complete opposite of Urbana.
Have you been to Tokyo?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. A world traveler. You should be interviewing him instead of me. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think about things like that. For example, I am a second-generation immigrant. My parents came here. And it took me most of my life to figure that out. It never occurred to me. I was
that
just
you
like,
were an immigrant.
Yeah, I was born here, and but there were a lot of different ways where I didn't feel like I fit exactly. I didn't know where I fit. I wasn't sure. It was like, okay, I'm not like these people, and I'm not like those people. In fact, you were telling an embarrassing story. My embarrassing story was in the 70s, I think it was. I was going to California for the first time, Southern California, and I thought, oh, finally, I'm going to see other Mexicans, I'm going to find my people. So I get off the plane and I'm wandering around out there, and I'm seeing actual Mexican people and thinking, there's alien to me as anybody I've ever seen. I am so unlike these people, and I'm so unlike all these people back in Illinois. I have no idea who I am. It was strange. I really thought I was just suddenly going to be surrounded by like images of myself, and that's the interesting.
Your family probably.
Yeah, and there's nothing at all like me. Just a different language, different shape, different size, different color, different everything. And it was just a really strange experience, and it took me a long time to reconcile that. Like what is that? How far can you come from those roots? How different can you be and still call yourself this or that? Or, it's just very strange. It's a strange thing. And even for me, born here and spent my whole life here as second generation, I still carry those questions of identity with me, kind of like I inherited them in a way through how I was raised, I suppose, and how I saw myself. But it must be more immediate when it's like you, and you're just like, okay, I'm making this choice.
Yes.
I'm stepping off this
And
ledge
it's something so I left Chile 22 years ago.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I was able to live with my partner. We've been together for that long, and it helps. And we met in college, so we share, we share culture, we share language, and we also share the evolution of belonging to something.
Yeah.
And in order to be an immigrant, you need to have a certain state of mind, or actually, or acceptance of new cultures. You need to be willing to let go of things from your past, of the way that you grew up, and actually, in a way, it means that you need to be able to change your identity.
Yeah.
Accept that some of your beliefs were wrong. Some of the things that you grew up, even though they make you happy, were different. And it doesn't mean that it's not assimilation. It's I think it's acceptance. Is you keep what you want. There's things that. So if you ask me, where are you from? I'm from Chile. Right. Yeah. I just happen to have 2 passports, but I have never paid taxes in Chile. All of my adult life has been outside Chile. And if you ask me to which system I feel more involved, it's completely to the U.S. I mean, this is my country now. This is my country as an adult. But you need to slowly accept that. In a way, you kind of like let go. You let go of somebody that you love. You still love it, but you stop needing it. And that's and then you start finding your identity with your community. But you need to allow yourself to love something else.
Yeah.
You need to be able to find the wrong in the U.S. and the wonderful in the U.S. Not just saying, oh, in my country the potatoes are like this, or in my country this food is like this, or otherwise you're gonna be forever. You can never be as good as the past or the nostalgia.
Oh, yeah.
So you need to open your heart to make new friends, to accept new people that are different than you, and love them by the way they are, not the way that you would like them to be, or the way that they are in your country, or the social codes that they have in your country. And accept the new ones and love the new ones. Not everybody is willing to do that.
No, that's
and true. Not everybody is an immigrant by choice.
Yeah.
So I would say that in my case, I was mostly an immigrant by choice. Of course, probably I immigrated to the U.S. because I never felt too comfortable in my country, because if I felt so comfortable, I would have gone back, right? But many people don't have the option. They are escaping something, or they're looking for opportunities that simply do not exist in their nation. And they spend their life with a nostalgia, or missing, or remembering something that they lost forever. So I voluntarily decided to leave Chile. I'm lucky enough to go back very often for work, because I'm an astronomer, and the biggest telescopes in the world are actually in the Atacama Desert in Chile. So I get to go to work to my home country. And so there's not much longing and nostalgia about it. But many people don't have that fortune. They cannot back. It's either too dangerous, or they cannot cross the border and come back. So being an immigrant is tough. I had it very easy. So that's why I don't always feel comfortable calling myself a Latino immigrant. Because the U.S. have a different vision of what a Latino immigrant is. They don't think I'm an academic that went to good schools and arrived in this country, through a normal airport.
Yeah, but there is or maybe I should phrase this as a question rather than a statement. But it must bother you to some extent that there is a fairly large constituency out there who sees you and the guys hanging drywall as one and the same, pretty much virtually identical, because of your ethnicity as opposed to your education or anything else. They don't care about that. They care that you're not European descendant or whatever. I mean, that's got to be disturbing, at least right now. I mean, it's always been kind of like this here, but it's really powerful.
No, I'm glad that you're asking this question, because